Hello. Today we're going to be looking at the Second Red Scare. And the main idea for this section is that the start of the Cold War and events at home helped to trigger a second Red Scare in the late 1940s and early 1950s. Our learning objectives is to analyze the causes and the effects of the Second Red Scare. The growing fear of communism. Adding to the growing fear of communism was the development of Soviet atomic weapons. In September 1949, Truman announced that the Soviet Union had detonated an atomic bomb. This was a shock to the nation. Truman began to strengthen the nation's military against a possible Soviet nuclear threat. Another thing, adding to the fear of communism, was Communist China. Communists in China had gained nearly full control of the country. The nationalist government under Chiang Kai-shek had fled to the island of Taiwan. China was in the hands of the Communist Party under the leadership of Mao Zedong. Americans worried that China increased the communist threat to the United States. Now looking at communism in the United States. The House of Un-American Activities Committee, or HUAC, investigated the full range of radical groups in the United States, including fascist and communist. Truman created a plan to investigate all federal employees. Those found to be disloyal to the United States were barred from federal employment. The Smith Act made it a crime to call for the overthrow of the U.S. government or to belong to an organization that did so. The McCarran Act limited the rights of communist organizations. Several spy cases in the late 1940s also fueled fears of communism. So first, looking at the House of Un-American Activities Committee, or HUAC, the committee explored possible communist influence in the American film industry. The so-called Hollywood 10 refused to answer HUAC questions about their beliefs or those of their colleagues. Many others in Hollywood did testify for fear that their names would be placed on a blacklist and they would be unable to find work in Hollywood. Truman investigated all federal employees to ensure the loyalty of government officials. The investigations turned up little evidence of disloyalty, but this investigation made clear that Truman was serious about fighting communism. The Smith Act. Truman charged several leaders of the Communist Party in the United States under this act. The act made it a crime to call for the overthrow of the U.S. government. The leaders were convicted, and their convictions were upheld in Dennis versus the United States. The McCarran Act. This act required communist organizations to register with the government, and it established a special board to investigate communist involvement. And it made it illegal to plan a totalitarian dictatorship and prevented communists from entering the United States. Now let's look at some of the spy cases that rocked the United States in the post-war years. Alger Hiss was convicted of being a spy for the Soviets. Klaus Fuchs, a Manhattan Project scientist, he gave atomic bomb information to the Soviets. And then we had the case of Ethel and Julius Rosenberg. They were convicted of passing secrets to the Soviets and they were executed. Now at the time of their execution, there were many people that were skeptical of their guilt, and many people felt that they didn't get a fair trial. In the years since, a lot of information has come forward to prove that yes, they indeed were guilty, and the federal government really didn't make public a lot of the evidence that they had against them. But nonetheless, this was another one of the spy cases that really rocked the country. Now, something that added to the Red Scare was the rise of Senator Joseph McCarthy. And so now we're going to look at Senator Joseph McCarthy and the Red Scare. Joseph McCarthy was a senator who claimed that there were 205 known communists working for the U.S. Department of State. Truman dismissed him as a ballyhoo artist. A political cartoonist dubbed McCarthy's tactic of spreading fear and making baseless charges McCarthyism. McCarthy's claims were rarely backed up with any evidence, but this didn't stop him from gaining a reputation as being the nation's leading top communist fighter. McCarthy succeeded when he made a special effort to defeat Maryland Senator Millard Tydings. McCarthyism spread beyond the Senate and into other branches of government, into universities, and into labor unions, and into private businesses. McCarthy continued his campaign from the Senate, but became increasingly wild in his accusations. In 1952, he began to go after fellow Republicans. In 1954, he attacked the U.S. Army, claiming that it was protecting communists. And this led to the McCarthy hearings, or the Army-McCarthy hearings, which took place over 4 years between 1950 and 1954. And it ruined the careers of prominent writers, actors, and politicians. And it earned McCarthy the nickname of Low Blow Joe. The hearings featured 35 days of televised hearings in the spring of 1954. 20 million Americans tuned in. This brought about the end of McCarthyism. McCarthy eventually died of alcoholism.